Open the podcast bay doors, Hal.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 90 of Welcome to Geektown. I'm your host, Kurt Onstead. I've been a proud geek all my life, being into role-playing games, board games, sci-fi, fantasy, and especially superheroes and comics. And I want to help others join me in those pursuits, but I found that sometimes people can get overwhelmed or feel left out because they don't already have what some consider the requisite knowledge to be considered a fan. And that's where Welcome to Geektown comes in. Here you can ask your questions without feeling like a gatekeeper is calling you out for not yet being fully versed in every aspect of your new interest. Starting this week, I'll be discussing the Loki show on Disney+. Similar to the WandaVision episodes, I have a special guest who is a longtime friend and fellow geek in a number of ways. She and I met through a LARP, which is a topic I'll definitely get to one of these days. As with all of my episodes where I have someone else to talk to, we went on for some time, so let's get right into it. We are here with my special guest, Anne Valiant. Welcome, Anne.
Great to be here.
Great to have you. We're going to be discussing Loki for the next few weeks, but let's go ahead and get to know you a little bit better first. How did you get into the Marvel Universe?
So along about, I believe, 1992, Fox debuted the animated version of X-Men. And about 2 episodes in, I was in love. And I read X-Men all through high school, which gives you a hint how old I am. A little bit into college, but after that point, I kind of faded out. Just didn't have time or funds for it anymore.
Understandable.
Yeah. But I mean, that was just one part of my various geek interests, but that was my first introduction into comic books, which I still enjoy, but in a much smaller scale. And I don't actually follow any superheroes at this point.
So you've been briefly into the X-Men, but didn't really follow the Marvel Universe at large in comics. But you have been watching the MCU since its beginning, correct?
In the theater, every single one, usually opening weekend, if not opening day. I think it was for Iron Man 3. I actually managed to get into an earlier screening. There was a marathon involved.
Yes, I remember those.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun, actually.
Back when you could do that in one day. All right, let's get into this show. Since you have watched the MCU in its entirety,
Yep.
This opening scene is very familiar already.
Oh, yeah. Led me to question, did they reshoot it for Loki or did they just recycle? I'm pretty sure they just recycled in-game footage.
Yeah, I'm almost positive that's what they had to do, because they weren't going to get Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr. to show up for a day to reshoot scenes that they had already shot. Then we get the Marvel Studios logo that's in green and gold.
Yep, Loki's colors.
Yes, perfect for Loki. Then we finally get some new footage.
Yay!
Of the Gobi Desert in Mongolia. And I noticed and thought that it was a mirror image of Tony Stark's landing in Iron Man after he first escapes from the Ten Rings, when he lands in his Mark I Iron Man suit in the desert.
I think I might rewatch Iron Man just to check on that. I think you're right.
Yeah, so I immediately saw that parallel there, and that was kind of Tony's first step towards becoming a hero, and so maybe this is Loki's first step. At least this version of Loki.
Yeah. No, getting chucked out of the sky it's humbling. And
yes.
That was part of the Prime Universe's method of redeeming Loki, was a little bit of humbling in various places. I find that the series is going much more literal kind of on that, as opposed to, big moments that humanize. These are like little like punches to the ego.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that first kind of punch, the first literal punch, comes in just a little bit when the TVA shows up, and you get that hilarious slapsticky
beautiful
moment with him getting hit in slow motion and the jaw just rippling.
No, it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. It's lovely, well shot. And B-15 keeps that perfect level of professional smugness. It's not way up here smugness, but it's like, yeah, we've seen this, whatever.
Yeah. So I take it you also watched with the subtitles on?
I did not.
Oh, okay. Then how did you know her name is B-15?
Because I recognized the actress, but I could not place her. And it was driving me nuts, as it usually does. So that means we go to our ever faithful IMDb and go, okay, where do I know you from? Oh, you were in Lovecraft Country. Okay. So, yeah.
All right. And IMDb credited her as B-15. Yeah, if you watch with subtitles, you get
everybody's name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I find that very helpful because there are some characters here who have names that are recognizable for comic book readers, but we'll get to them in a little bit. First, let's go into the actual TVA where Loki gets his new uniform.
That is what we call fan service. And as a fan, yes. Thank you for servicing me. I appreciate it. I have a very good friend who is a huge Tom Hiddleston fan. And that was a birthday present for her. He was in his birthday suit, so obviously birthday, you know what I mean.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yeah. In fact, I was going to bring that up. Your friend has a little addition that she wants to bring to the conversation.
Oh, I talked her into it. I used air quotes on talked her into it because it was, hey, you want to do this thing? Oh my God, yes. Can we call it this? Oh my God, yes. That is how it went. So this is the patty cake swoon scale. She has given this episode a total of 7.5, though has not given me the details of how she came to that number, out of 10, of course. My guess is because our poor anti-hero spends most of the time in a prison jumpsuit, which nobody looks good in a prison jumpsuit. That's kind of the point.
That's true. But you do get that moment, and I immediately thought of her when it happened.
I think that's how the number stayed above a 5, because this is not Hiddleston at his prettiest. He's beaten up. He's in a prison jumpsuit.
Yeah, he's in a prison jumpsuit most of the time. He's fairly worn out, but he does start out with the full-on regalia, and then you get that very special moment.
Yes,
where he's told to hold very still by the robot.
Yeah, you do. I mean, the man's been working out, and really, he should have all that effort admired. That's what we're here for.
Not me personally, but I appreciate it for others' sake. Yeah. And then immediately after that, he gets dropped down to the next level. And this is when it started giving me Brazil vibes. The Terry Gilliam movie. It's very much a bureaucracy, and everyone just has their little tiny cog in the machine.
Yep.
And this guy's job is just to have a printout of everything you've ever said and sign here.
Yep. His entire identity is that job and that cat.
Yes, I love that the cat is on the mug.
Uh-huh. And if you look closely, one of the things I did notice that the tiny monitor that's in front of him, he's playing solitaire.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
What else are you going to do between variants
Variants.
showing up? And then the last step in the processing is to verify he is not a robot, which I thought was one of the funniest scenes in the show.
It's both really funny and, in a way, when you think about it, and I watched it for a second round today and really thought about it, it's
Hmm.
got some very interesting, like, psychological, philosophical questions. Loki is all like, wait a minute, what if I am a robot? The man's got identity issues.
Well, I mean, if someone said to you, to your knowledge, are you a robot? You have to have that moment of,
Wait a
well,
minute,
wait, hold
am I?
on. I could be, and just not aware of it. If I was.
Would I know? But what if I?
Yeah. But yeah, this is going to get into identity. I think the show is very much going to be about identity and who you are
Yep.
and who you believe yourself to be.
And who you could be.
Yeah. And so this not a robot, although it's played mostly for humor, does start to bring up those themes.
Oh yeah, it's a reasonable question. I also want to know one of the questions that has not been answered. I hope gets answered. I bet will not get answered. What's a temporal aura? And then it cuts out. It shoves him into the next room, and I'm like, but what is a temporal aura?
Well, I don't have a concrete answer for you, but I can give you the basics of what I think it is.
Aha.
It's basically just it is a picture, you get that big flash right before it happens, and it shows basically your aura as it relates to time. And so somebody who can read your temporal aura would probably be able to recognize on sight, oh, this is a variant,
Okay.
and he's X years old, maybe, and stuff like that. It just is a unique identifier of you and your travels through time.
Okay. I can work with that. Seems a bit vague. I want more.
Well, you get more. You get a lot of explanation in this next scene. This is the exposition dump. And we have a lot of comic book related stuff to explain
Okay.
with this next bit, because we get the Miss Minutes presentation, which is this very 60s PSA animation style.
Oh, yeah. It is directly from the mid 60s.
And it is, like I said, it's a giant exposition dump.
Oh,
but
yeah.
it's presented in a way that I thought was entertaining and fun to watch. But I have to ask, how easy was this to follow, or how hard was this to follow? And how much did you know or recognize from your brief Marvel comic book experience?
I followed it fairly well. I don't believe I came out of it with any great big overarching questions. I think because I took it at the surface level amount of information it was. Knowing that there are layers upon layers upon layers of mechanics and mythology and detail that are actually underneath this. This is the introductory video. This is the how jury duty works. This is how the DMV works, which is what the whole thing felt like, was a jury duty or a DMV. And I mean, that was the point. So I understand that you've got three guys who I always want to call Time Lords, but that's not it.
No.
That's
they are
different...
the Timekeepers.
Thank you.
Time Lords is a different universe.
But yeah, the Timekeepers. Got three of them. They said, wow, multiverses are bad. Here's the one timeline that is true. And if you step away from the assigned path, you are now a Nexus event. And the TVA is going to show up and it is going to fix it. So we do not stray from the sacred timeline.
Right.
Did that sum it up pretty well?
Yeah, pretty well. And so the Timekeepers have been in the comics for decades. We actually were originally introduced to their alternate reality evil versions, which are the Time Twisters. And interestingly, Time Twister is what they call the device that forces Loki back into place when he runs away.
And he misbehaves.
Yes, exactly. So that device is called a Time Twister, but the Time Twisters in the Marvel Comics are the evil versions of the Timekeepers. And the Time Twister / Timekeepers relationship with the TVA is reversed causality-wise from how it is presented here in the show. The TVA existed first, and the last of the TVA administrators, before he died, he was named He Who Remains, and decided to create beings who could watch over the timeline after he was gone and preserve it and protect it. The first attempt he made at this ended up with the Time Twisters, who wanted to conquer the timeline. But in another version of events, he instead created the Timekeepers, who are more of a protective force watching over the timeline. The Timekeepers and the Time Twisters fight each other a lot, usually through intermediaries, trying to destroy each other's timelines or make sure that their timeline is the dominant one. And so there have been a lot of stories involving the Timekeepers and the Time Twisters in Avengers, Fantastic Four, Thor, and even the What If comic. The What If comic is usually made of one-shots, where each issue is a completely separate story. There was one 5-issue story arc called Time Quake, and that involved the Time Twisters and the Timekeepers, and lots of different alternate Earths. So, in the Marvel Universe, in the comics, there is not just one timeline.
Right.
There are infinite number of timelines. We know that Marvel is considered the 616 timeline. That is its label. And so, having just one timeline in the movies and saying, this is the one true timeline and everything else is pruned off and prevented from existing, is a very big change from the comics.
It's a sensible one, given the shift from a comic book format that can go across a lot of different titles when you're trying to deal with a central cinematic universe, and make it accessible from any given point.
That's true, but in this presentation, we get some key words right next to each other that are leading us towards the next Doctor Strange movie.
Oh, yes, they are.
Yeah, because she says that if other timelines exist, it will lead to madness and another multiversal war. And the next Doctor Strange movie is titled Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness.
Loki and Doctor Strange 2 share the same writer. I looked this up because I was kind of curious what else this guy had done. This is Michael Waldron. And he is credited as the writer for Doctor Strange 2. So they're setting this up so you have the same writer who has complete control over all of this diverging timeline stuff. So it doesn't get super messy, which it can. I mean, we've seen so many timeline things that have like, wait, what? No, why?
Time travel is one of my favorite story tropes. And so I have read and watched all sorts of time travel stories, from the good to the bad. Uh, that's one of the reasons that I wanted to specifically discuss this show, is because I know there's going to be a lot of time travel stuff to discuss and different theories of time travel. And so right now, in this theory of time travel, we are dealing with a singular universe. And in just a little bit, we're going to hear that the time travel of Avengers Endgame was supposed to happen.
Yep.
So that means that it's a universe where any time travel that will happen in the future has already happened in its past. There is no second timeline where they didn't experience that time travel and then somebody traveling back creates that alternate timeline. So it's not Back to the Future rules.
Right.
It is Bill and Ted rules.
It is Bill and Ted rules. I think they would appreciate that.
So I enjoyed all of that exposition, and as a comic book geek, there was a lot in there for me to unpack and get into. Oh, one other thing is the Nexus events. Wanda, Scarlet Witch, in the comics was referred to as a Nexus being in storylines involving time travelers. There are certain people whose powers relate to probability and so can change the timeline and are considered the anchor point of that particular universe. And in WandaVision, in the last episode that was a sitcom, the commercial was for a drug called Nexus.
Oh, yeah.
When that episode aired, I tied it to the Nexus of all realities, which also has to do with multiple universes and alternate timelines and all that sort of thing. But it could also relate to her being a Nexus being. We know that she is in Doctor Strange 2, and so she is probably going to help create her own Nexus event that starts creating these alternate timelines. So they are building these little seeds. They're putting these little seeds in that look like they're all going to blossom in the next Doctor Strange movie. And with Sam Raimi directing it,
I forgot about that.
Really looking forward to it.
Yeah. When's that one due again?
March of 2022.
Okay. I can manage.
But let's get back to this show. We go to France in 1549,
Mm-hmm.
and we finally meet Mobius, who is investigating an attack that took place at this Nexus event. Now, I love Owen Wilson. He is one of my favorite actors, and he is having a great time with this.
He's excellently cast in this part. This seems very ideal from him. Like, he's a guy doing a job that he enjoys and he takes seriously, but he's also, he's a dude,
Yeah. And Mobius is another comic book character who has existed for quite some time and is specifically modeled after a comic book creator. Mobius was drawn to look like writer and editor Mark Gruenwald, who was basically considered the historian for Marvel. You could come to him with any character, basically, and say, when was the last time he appeared? What is his current status quo? And he would just know. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of the Marvel Universe. And so when Walt Simonson in the Thor comics created the TVA and gave it a mid-level bureaucrat who was there and just kind of knew everything, he said, no, that's Mark.
Mm-hmm.
And so Mobius M. Mobius was, like I said, middle management, but gets promoted throughout his history in the comics. Unfortunately, we lost Mark Gruenwald. He had a heart attack at a very young age. But I actually own a piece of him.
Literal or figurative?
Literal.
Oh my.
When Mark Grunwald died, he requested that his ashes be put into a comic. And coincidentally, his magnum opus, called Squadron Supreme, was being collected into trade paperback for the first time, right around the same time. And so his ashes are mixed into the dye in the very first printing of that trade paperback. And I bought that trade paperback, so I own a little tiny bit of
Little
Mark
tiny
Gruenwald.
bit. Nice. And that's how you do that.
Legally. So Mobius is investigating this attack, and we see this little kid who was a witness. And when he asks him who did it, the kid points at a stained glass window of the devil.
Of the devil. And there are so many places to go with that. I know that I think I know where you're going to go with that, because it was brought up when you talked about WandaVision and turned out not to be the case.
Yes. And now I've been avoiding reading interviews, and I'm avoiding other people's takes on their own theories and such as much as I can. But I do still visit those websites, and so I can't not see the headlines.
Right.
And so I know for a fact that they are not bringing Mephisto into this show.
Ah, okay.
I know that some people, when they saw that stained glass window in the trailer, some people were already theorizing that Mephisto would show up. But I think those horns...
Oh yeah, they're the Loki crown.
Yeah, they are Loki's helmet.
Yeah.
That's what the kid is talking about when he points at that stained glass window and is blaming the devil for this.
And the devil brings candy. The devil, well, the devil comes in all sorts of disguises.
Yes. I love the kablooey gum.
Uh-huh.
Not a real brand that exists either in our universe or the Marvel universe.
Oh, it's going to exist
before.
in our universe by Comic-Con. I guarantee you.
Oh, I'm sure. Yes. But the symbolism of calling the gum kablooey was not lost on me.
Nope.
This is a force that is basically trying to explode things and make things chaotic.
Probably actively trying to create a multiverse.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah, that is a theory, officially, but it's a solid theory.
Yeah, and it's borne out by the evidence we've seen so far, because they are taking the devices that would normally reset these alternate timeline branches and prune them off and prevent them from existing. Now, the TVA is showing up again later and setting new charges.
Right. But
whoever this force is, and we learn that later, but whoever this force is now has multiple of these timeline-destroying devices.
Yeah, reset charges.
Yeah. So what their plans are for those devices, I'm sure, is going to be one of the big threats of the show.
Mm-hmm.
Now, from here, there is one thing I wanted to note, because one of the other TVA employees shows up in France and says to Mobius, "Hey, you should look at this." And we see Loki's rap sheet for a moment.
You freeze-framed that, didn't you?
Well, of course I did. And we get a couple of little Marvel shout-outs. Loki's sector is 1990-2099. Marvel comic readers will know that Marvel 2099 was an imprint for a while that was an alternate future of Marvel's universe.
When did that first show up? What year?
Late 1992.
It sounds vaguely familiar, so I think it was when I was reading it. I don't think I read the series, but Yeah.
Well, there were multiple series. There was
Yeah.
a Spider-Man 2099, Punisher 2099, X-Men 2099, Ghost Rider 2099. Basically, there were a bunch of future versions of heroes, and one original hero created by Stan Lee, Ravage 2099.
They might be sitting in some long boxes that are in our dining room that I need to clean out.
And the other thing on the rap sheet that I wanted specifically to note was gender.
Oh, what did it say? Because I believe the word that best describes Loki is fluid, and that's in all things.
That is exactly what it says on the rap sheet.
I get a cookie because I was right.
Yes. In the comics, it has already been confirmed, and now it is confirmed in the MCU as well, that Loki is gender fluid.
I think fluid is just the word that describes him completely. I mean, not just in gender, but I'm guessing in any way you want to apply it. I mean, Loki's mind is a bag of cats. I think that is an accurate statement. Cats are fluid because they fill whatever vessel they damn well want to.
Yeah.
So this all works for me, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And again, because I can't completely avoid spoilers for future episodes, I do know that Lady Loki has been cast.
Nice.
So we will see that fluidity within the next 5 episodes.
So I looked at IMDb for a few things, and I'm trying to remember anybody I saw cast that made me go, hey, wait a minute, besides one person who I'm pretty sure is going to be our big bad. I don't know if I should say, though.
Well, go ahead and say it, and if it gets too spoilery or I think it doesn't fit in, then I can cut it out.
Richard E. Grant is cast. It did not list who he is cast as.
Okay.
Most other actors had their characters listed. Richard E. Grant's did not, and I think that is specifically because he is a big old surprise character. My guess is, while we have an idea who the hooded figure in the field is, I think it's going to be played by Richard E. Grant.
Okay.
That's my theory. We'll see if I'm right. We'll see if I'm wrong.
All right.
See if I'm half right.
But then after we get that rap sheet bit, we then get back to the TVA and Loki's trial.
Once he found his ticket.
Yes, of course.
And I'm pretty sure that every single audience member just cheered when the guy who didn't have his ticket got pruned. I mean, that was the entire point of that guy.
Oh, yeah. We see him briefly earlier in the show. He's the guy saying, my dad works for Goldman Sachs.
Uh-huh.
And, I'm going to have your job and all that. Yeah, all that.
And we're all immediately, the audience,
entitled, privileged.
The audience immediately goes, oh my God, do not bring that guy back. And oh, look, problem solved.
But at the trial, we get another comic book character in a very different form from how they've been presented in the comics.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I take it they toned down the judge quite a bit.
Yeah, I would say that. The judge is a character named Ravonna Renslayer in the comics.
Such a good name.
Yes. And a very interesting character in that she was Kang's unrequited love. And Kang is a time-traveling conqueror from the 31st century who shows up and is an Avengers villain most of the time, trying to come back and conquer the 20th century because he needs a challenge, or he thinks it will be easier, or his motives vary, but he is a time-traveling villain who falls in love with the daughter of another warlord in his time period and wants to marry her, but is rebuffed. And she ends up fighting on the side of Immortus, which is Kang's future self.
Bless you, comic books. Bless you. Isn't Kang also one of the aliens on The Simpsons?
Kang and Kodos are the aliens on The Simpsons, but their names are an homage to the Star Trek Klingons in the original series that shared that name. And Kang is just kind of a, not real common, but you get a lot of characters in sci-fi who have those hard consonant names and are villains.
Right.
Kang, Ming, Krang from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. If you want a bad guy, you give him lots of K sounds and hard G's.
You make it sound like a punch in your head, but against metal.
Exactly. Yeah. But the important thing about Kang for the MCU is that he has been announced as the villain for Ant-Man 3.
Oh, really?
So the fact that this character has a history with Kang in the comics, and in the comics has no relation to the TVA, is not a judge, is not any of those. She is a hero/villain in her own right, depending on who she's siding with and what the story needs exactly.
Right.
So I'm hoping, because this is an actress who was in Black Mirror and got a lot of notoriety from that show.
She's been around in quite a few things.
Yeah.
She was also in Jupiter Ascending and in a very lovely but small period piece called Belle.
Okay.
This is Gugu Mbatha Raw.
And since she is a known actress, hopefully that hints that we'll be seeing more of her. And I love her character so far. She is basically every worn-out judge from every lawyer show where she's like, I know where you're going with this. Just don't bother. Yeah.
Everybody at the TVA has seen Loki's nonsense before from somebody else. And they are all, oh God, of course we have to go with this one again. Why can't they ever just go through the robot machine and suck it up? No, they have to ask, wait, what would happen? Or they have to question our logic every single time. Because of course, Loki questions the logic of this singular universe and who makes the rules. And so why are you here?
Yeah.
You know, it is always both the defendant or the student thinking they know more than the judge or the teacher, which is never the case.
No. And at the same time, of course it's not the case. They've specifically made the TVA to not be known by the regular public. It's kind of frustrating. I can see Loki's point of view where it's like, here you are you guilty or not? And it's like, well, wait, I don't even know anything about what I'm supposed to be guilty of. All I did was pick up a Tesseract and run away.
That's all I did, man. Well, and it was on my second listening to the judge, that I really felt like, I think I understand why my first watching, I got this interesting Cold War vibe.
Okay.
Because it's you are guilty even though you don't know what you did. We know what you did. We know it was wrong. You may not know what you did, but it was wrong. It is, if you want me to get literary, there's a lot of 1984 Orwellian stuff happening.
Okay.
Between Loki and the TVA. I will go on a rant whenever you're ready.
I was thinking more Catch-22 than 1984, where it's that whole sort of, you don't know the rules of the bureaucracy you've been stuck into. And so now how do you negotiate and navigate your way through it when no one is telling you what the rules are?
That's solid.
And the rules seem to be contradictory at points.
Yep, that's solid. There are two things that started leading me into 1984 territory.
Okay.
Again, I kind of got that Cold War vibe. And I started thinking about it. First, we have Loki, whose big preach point during the Avengers is that essentially freedom is slavery.
Yeah.
If you are free, you are bound to make decisions for yourself, and you are bound to make the wrong decisions. If somebody is telling you what to do, you will make the right decisions because somebody has already determined the correct path. We have the timekeepers who have determined the correct path. And therefore, Loki is now a variant going off the correct path. And he preaches all through the episode that while he wants to rule because freedom is slavery, also he makes his own choices. He does his own thing. Nobody controls him. Chaos and mischief, etc., and so forth. And the timekeepers are very much big brothers. They are watching. The TVA is watching.
Yeah.
There's not, like a 8 minutes hate or anything particularly menacing in it. It's bureaucratic, it's banal, not menacing, but it had that same, you're always being watched, you are always being judged. There is a correct. You don't necessarily know what the correct is. The correct can change, and you may veer off the path without knowing it. You may do something wrong without having the first clue that you've done something wrong until TVA agents show up and say, well, you did something wrong. We need to fix you. I was late for work. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the fact that being late for work was one of the examples they gave back in the presentation, it seems like these Nexus events should be big. Yeah. And as we see later, it seems like a lot of them involve Infinity Stones. So they should be these big things involving, like major artifacts like the Infinity Stones and such. But if being late for work is something that can throw you off of your given path, that's a scary thing to think about, that you can have that small a change and have someone show up and say, all right, you screwed up. You're now being reset, which we still don't know exactly what reset means in the case of the variants. In the case of a timeline, it seems like it means that timeline is basically destroyed.
Right. But what does that mean for the people who are in that timeline?
Right.
Namely the variants.
Yeah.
What does that mean for that kid in France, in 1500s France?
Mobius presents it as, we're going to get you back to where you belong.
Right.
So the question is, when a timeline is reset, do the people who are on that timeline cease to exist, or do they merge back into their prime selves? Is resetting a timeline mass genocide?
That's intense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one of the weird things about this version of time travel, is that if alternate universes are being destroyed, that can be seen as destroying all of the life in a universe. And so that is genocide on a cosmic scale.
Well, and then I guess the argument attached to that is the TVA tries to get there fast enough so that the branch does not develop into a big population affected. So you catch it at the bud instead of it being able to grow and become more.
Okay. And so, because very few people have been altered from their original timeline, pruning that timeline off thus makes it so that the prime timeline and that timeline are close enough to one another at that point that it's not considered destroying a universe.
Correct. It becomes deja vu, is what you could argue that it becomes.
Okay. Just a glitch in the Matrix.
Exactly.
Getting back to the trial, we have another couple of fun moments with Loki trying to escape and use his powers, and we find out that magic powers do not work in the TVA.
Hilariously finding out that magic powers do not work in the TVA.
The TVA is really powerful.
Well, TVA is really powerful, but the way that they set it up is very much like he is having a bout of erectile dysfunction. It is a moment of, this never happens to me. Hang on. Give me a minute.
Yeah.
Let me
Everybody
concentrate.
Quiet. Let me.
And meanwhile, you have B-15 standing there going.
And I found it interesting that they say it's not the collar he's wearing, for instance.
Right.
It's not that his powers have been temporarily nullified while he's a prisoner here. It's that in the TVA, they don't work, period.
Yep.
And that's why you can have Infinity Stones being used as paperweights, is because once they've been brought into the TVA, they have been rendered inert. And so there's no reason to guard them as powerful objects. Although, if someone were able to get into the TVA, take those stones, and then travel back to the regular universe, would they now function again?
That is a very good question. And we'll find out probably when Loki leaves the TVA. And does he have powers again?
I'm sure he'll have powers again. Because if he doesn't have powers, then why would they send him anywhere?
Yeah.
They would just use him for information. And thus the show would be very boring.
Very.
Although, we'll get to it in a second, but I would be completely fine watching a show that is just Mobius and Loki chatting.
Well, there was parts when Mobius and Loki were chatting that, I mean, it was a therapy session as much as anything else.
Yeah, especially towards the end of the episode.
Oh, yeah.
But speaking of Loki and Mobius chatting, we get Mobius coming in to the court and presenting his suggestion of, let me take him. And Ravonna basically says, okay, but anything goes sideways and it's on you.
Yeah. I have questions about their relationship to each other because the way that Mobius spoke to Ravonna felt kind of personal, a little kiss-uppy, but also not it felt like they had some sort of past.
Well, I would think that in the TVA, you're probably there for so long that you get to know nearly everybody else, or at least within your department.
Right.
So, yeah, I love the line of him, it feels like I'm always looking up to you. It's good. It's appropriate.
Yeah, it's very appropriate. Damn right it is.
But, yeah, as I mentioned, the first time we see Mobius in the comics, he's sort of middle management of the TVA, and I would put this version of Mobius there as well. He's not high up on the food chain, but he's not a peon either. He does have people that he's in charge of, but he's definitely not the boss.
He seems to have an established reputation, too.
True.
It's not like, who is this Yahoo? It's like, oh, no, we know who you are, and you're thinking outside the box. I'm not sure if we're cool with that.
So him looking up to the judge and having that sort of relationship where she is above him in status, I think makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But he does take Loki and they head off to the Time Theater.
Or as we should call it, the Theater of Pain. It's rough. I mean,
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. You and I had a discussion last week before we had watched the episode, but we had seen the trailer, and we knew that the version of Loki we were getting was one who had not lived through Thor the Dark World or Ragnarok or Infinity War. Not that the other version of Loki lived through Infinity War, but this is a still full-on villainous version of Loki, and we were wondering if he was going to learn some of what happened to his prime version, and that's what we get in this scene and future scenes in the Time Theater here,
right,
where he does learn what happened to his prime self. And seeing him in chains being returned to Asgard, and then the death of Frigga, that was some hard stuff to watch.
Yeah. Well, and we know from the Dark World that the death of Frigga deeply impacted Loki.
Yes.
I mean, deeply. He did not learn the specifics of how he and Thor beat the Dark Elves or that he faked his own death in order to take over Asgard.
Yeah, they skipped his triumph, both when Mobius presents bits and pieces of his life, and then later when Loki comes back, he skips over that entirely and goes to Ragnarok and then Infinity War, where he sees his father say, "I love you." And then his brother say, "I'd give you a hug if you were here." And then seeing finally his death. So he only does see really kind of the tragedy and just a little bit of bittersweet reuniting with his family before they or he dies.
And Loki's death was not a quick, merciful one. It was slow.
And very painful from what it appeared.
Very painful.
Yeah.
So I think that hit him fairly hard as well. So it looked like. And I mean, he was aware that he was at least partially working for Thanos in the Avengers, correct?
Yes.
All right. So he knows that having that previous relationship, cozying up to that power, did not save him in the end.
Right. And I'm sure that this version of Loki always intended to betray Thanos eventually.
Oh, yeah.
And so he sees that moment and sees that it is completely unsuccessful in the worst possible way. But what I did enjoy in this scene here between Mobius and Loki, besides just the chemistry between the two actors, which, as I said, I could watch a show that is just the two of them hanging out and talking. But Mobius points out that Loki's purpose is to cause pain, suffering, and death, also others can achieve the best version of themselves.
I wrote that down too.
And there's an interesting parallel there to the comics, because in the comics, Loki created the Avengers, as well as in the movies. In the comics, he was trying to get vengeance on Thor, and he basically kind of mind-controlled the Hulk, and Rick Jones called up all the superheroes he could find and say, "Help, the Hulk is on the loose and not acting like himself." And so that's how the Avengers teamed up, and they find out at the end of that first issue that it was Loki that had arranged all of this. And so in both the comics and the movies, Loki is responsible for creating the Avengers. And nice. So he did create the best version of these characters.
Well, that's what villains are supposed to do, is create heroes. Well, I mean, they don't think that's what they're supposed to do, but that is the point of, literary point of a villain.
Yes and no. I understand what you're saying with that, but at the same time, there are so many heroes out there who end up creating their villains.
Yes.
That it is definitely a two-way street. Oh, I missed a moment that I wanted to point out. When Mobius is leading Loki to the Time Theater, and Loki looks out at the TVA, that shot is straight out of Walt Simonson's Thor and Fantastic Four comics that he wrote and drew, where he introduced the TVA.
Okay.
That massive expanse of what appears to be basically infinite various towers, and
it looked to me like a pocket dimension, that it was a city within a pocket dimension. And that the pillars go from the ceiling to the floor of said pocket dimension. The thoughts I had as I looked at this were very Jetsons and Queen's World Fair.
Yeah.
With these saucer sections that are, living and building. I have many thoughts on the design of this show. So many.
Well, like I said, the design of the TVA in particular was very inspired by the original artist's rendition.
Right.
And the interiors all have that kind of 70s kitsch.
I looked it up.
Okay.
I looked up a few things. So as I was watching the first round, I mean, I'm just giggling at the retrofuturism because it's one of my favorite things. I adore me some retrofuturism. The first thing I thought of was a very bad movie called Moon 02. So bad it is a Mystery Science Theater 3000 episode, a very early one.
Yeah.
So I looked it up. 1969 was when it was made. And then I went, hey, wait a minute. It's a knockoff of 2001. So you see see some similarities in the design there, that you have these very round and very clean shapes. But 2001 was very bright. Yes. White ceilings, white floors, white walls with bright furniture. The TVA is not bright. It is dark.
It's beige.
Yeah, it's very, well, I mean, but it's also an office.
Right.
And I found a piece on The Verge that they talked to Kate Herron, who is the director and one of the executive producers of this. And she was going for a pretty specific look. She wanted it to look like all those offices that you worked in that never quite got to the next level of technology.
Okay.
They were always several steps behind because it still worked. It was fine. It did the job. We don't need the new shiny thing. We need the thing that works. And they specifically worked with technology that might have been introduced or prototyped, but never caught on. Somebody might have some of this stuff or something that vaguely looks like it in their attic, but it never caught on. It never became the next big thing. It was never a PC. It was never a Mac. It was never an iPhone. It was a Newton.
Got it.
That kind of thing.
All the Betamaxes and
yes,
mini discs.
Exactly. A few laser discs here and there.
Yeah.
She specifically cited Hitchhiker's Guide, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. She did not.
I'm sure she's thinking the BBC, not the 2005.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, which one? But the 2005 has some of those. I mean, Marvin is very round.
True.
And kind of matches that late 60s, early 70s aesthetic. She cites Metropolis, which is early 30s.
Yeah.
Brazil, which we've already mentioned, and Blade Runner. I think the Blade Runner stuff is a lot in the oppressive light.
Okay.
But don't quote me on that. I saw a lot of Fallout in it because I've played all the Fallout video games, especially the robot that strips Loki is very Fallout. In fact, I think you pretty much have something like that, except it's on wheels in New Vegas. But you really see it in the robots and in the computers. The wood paneling that is everywhere, that is very late 60s, 70s. I mean, it's even on the Minutemen's devices that they wear on their arms.
Mm-hmm.
And they used to scan. There's a little bit of wood paneling at the end, that inlay.
Yeah.
Oh, Kate Herron also is quoted in the Verge article as saying she was going for Mad Men meets brutalist architecture.
Now, I'm not familiar with brutalist architecture, so please.
Some of my least favorite. Again, big in the 60s and the 70s when you were building large buildings that you wanted to make a statement, but you didn't have a lot of money. They are big, blocky, ugly, and intimidating buildings.
Okay.
The communist countries like to use them a lot because, again, kind of cheap. And also we're pulling away from the old world over-decorated aesthetic because these are usually very clean. Government Center in Boston is one of the finest examples of brutalist architecture. It's hideous. It's this big, ugly, big block of a building, but it's got some stuff that goes out towards the end. So I think they were trying to go for an upside down pyramid, but it looks like a kid's blocks pyramid, except it's upside down. And those giant faces that were in the judge's room, and again, also out in the city, in the judge's, in the courtroom, those are brutalist style as well. A little more Art Deco, but again, they're big, they're very simple, and also we're on the Grandmaster's arena in Ragnarok.
Not those exact faces.
Well, I didn't think they were the exact faces, but still,
because
giant faces.
In the TVA, those are the timekeepers.
Yeah.
In Ragnarok, one of them was Beta Ray Bill, which is a Thor supporting character, and they were definitely little nods to Marvel continuity.
They are one of the many Easter eggs that Marvel just loves to lay.
Yes, exactly.
And that's fine. The production designer, incidentally, has worked on other Marvel films. He worked on Black Panther and on Captain Marvel as well. Okay. But this is a very distinctive mid-century style. It is absolutely on purpose, 100%. Here are some books.
I could tell it had a very put together look to it that was definitely purposeful, and I recognized as being inspired from things that have existed in the past. And yeah, that all that technology, the hollow projector runs on reel-to-reel tape, basically.
I love it when the reel-to-reel tape ran out. Oh, that was so good.
End of file.
And all the other technology they had in the closing credits. Again, there were lots of reel-to-reel, other typewriters, very manual machines.
The printout of everything Loki said was on that dot matrix gear-fed paper.
That we remember very well from middle school and high school.
Even elementary for me.
I grew up in the middle of nowhere. We barely knew what a computer was.
My family was a very early adopter. We had an Apple II Plus in my house that had a serial number that was like A00000.
Nice. We did have the first Macintosh in 86. Was when we got our first Macintosh, and it was, I believe, the first one, first commercially available. Not like the first one off the market, but
the first model of Macintosh.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, no, we had an Apple II Plus, and then eventually graduated to a Mac Plus when it came out. But we had the dot matrix printer with it. And,
so loud. That's some PTSD right there. Oh my God.
Another quick moment I wanted to touch on that we haven't discussed yet was in the Time Theater when Mobius is going through his greatest hits, and we see that Loki was D.B. Cooper.
Yeah, that was hilarious.
Were you already familiar with the legend of D.B. Cooper before this?
Yes.
Because I definitely was.
Yeah, I was, and mostly thanks to Drunk History.
Okay.
Which, questionable source in general, but man, do you get some good stories.
Oh, yeah. I feel like D.B. Cooper is also one of the patron saints of Cracked.
Yes.
So I have read many stories on Cracked that will reference D.B. Cooper, even if he's only tangentially related.
Archer has referenced him as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
For the uninitiated, D.B. Cooper was the alias given for a man who boarded a plane in the 60s. Do you remember exact date?
Yeah, I looked it up. It was November 24th, 1971.
Oh,
and the airline was Northwest Oriental Airlines.
Well, since you looked it up more recently than I have, why don't you continue the tale of D.B. Cooper?
So DB is actually a mistake. He gave his name when he bought his ticket as David Cooper. DB was overheard by one of the either policemen or FBI agents who worked the case, and that's how he became DB Cooper. But he's on the airplane. It is a half full flight between, I think it's Portland and Seattle. I know the end was Seattle, or was it Tacoma and Seattle?
Tacoma and Seattle is barely a flight. That's
Okay, so it must have been Portland. Anyway, somewhere in that vicinity. It was less than an hour of a flight. He orders a bourbon and water. And when the flight attendant brings it to him, he hands her a note. She dismisses it because she thinks this is just another guy giving her a phone number. And he says, no, you want to read this. Pats his briefcase and says, I have a bomb. And then he instructs her to sit down with him, explains what he wants and what is she supposed to do. And she complies. She tells the pilot that they need to land. Everybody has to get off the plane, and he wants $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. So all of that is complied with. They land in Seattle. Everybody gets off the plane except for the stewardess and the pilots. And they hand him a briefcase. No, sorry, not a briefcase. A duffel bag with $200,000 in it and 4 parachutes. And then D.B. Cooper jumps off the plane once it's back in the air. And he was never found.
Yep.
That is the end of that story. D.B. Cooper vanished into the Pacific Northwest and was never heard from again. They did find in the 80s some of the money, but that's it. That's the only thing that has ever been found.
And they got all of those details down to a T when they presented it in the show here. And
down
if you
to
look...
the drink order.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And if you look at the sketch artist's rendition of D.B. Cooper, because they didn't have a photograph of him, it is dead on. He definitely looks like he could be... Especially when they slick his hair back like they did for the show. It was amazing. And, they showed that moment in the trailer, or at least in one of the trailers that I watched. I watched, I think, 2 of them before I said, okay, I've seen everything I want to see before I watch the show.
But they never really showed you much more. They just put it in a different order.
But yeah, we see him... as D.B. Cooper jump off of the plane and
wink at the stewardess.
Right. And the Bifrost Bridge take him back. And so when I originally saw that, I thought that was going to be one of his adventures that he went on during the course of the show. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting that they present it as a flashback. And so that's not going to be how he travels around in the show. It's one of those lovely misdirects that Marvel does when they put their trailers together. And you think you know what's going on, and then they say, surprise!
Nor is it really a question of why does Loki need a suitcase full of money? Because it wasn't about the suitcase full of money. Apparently, it was a bet he lost to Thor.
Yeah.
Again, I've got questions. I'm okay if they never get answers. I don't think you're
going to get answers for that one.
Fine.
But similar to the having a Mobius and Loki conversation show, I would watch the heck out of a young Loki and Thor
being brothers,
daring each other and betting each other to do the ridiculously hilarious things that end up happening.
Well, and you get little snippets of it here and there. In Ragnarok, Thor tells the story of picking up the snake that he admired, which incidentally Hemsworth improvised. That was totally improvised because Waititi loves that sort of thing.
Oh yeah.
Which is one of the reasons it's so good, is just like so yeah. But I mean, stuff like that, the adventures of young Thor and Loki would be delightful.
There's a fun book out right now called Thor and Loki Double Trouble.
Oh god.
That is basically that.
Okay.
It is young Thor and Loki getting into misadventures in Asgard and occasionally Midgard. Those of you who read comics, I recommend that miniseries. I believe it either is about to end or just ended recently. So it should be collected in trade paperback reasonably soon. But let's jump back forward to where we had kind of left off. Mobius has to leave the time theater, and Loki, when he got helped up off of the floor, apparently took that opportunity to pickpocket Mobius and take the time twister, because he uses that and escapes into the bowels of the TVA.
It's called a time twister again, correct?
Yes.
And it only moves the person, not the furniture.
Right. It basically seems to move you along your timeline. So he jumps back to when he first arrives through the portal into the TVA. Loki kind of follows back and runs back into Casey, who had taken the Tesseract from him at the beginning. And this is where we find out that there are Infinity Stones here, and that they're used as paperweights, and this is when Loki really starts to realize how powerful the TVA is. When these universal-powered artifacts are nothing but paperweights to them, that is a power scale that even a god is not used to dealing with.
That's also there for us as the audience. I mean, through the 22, 23 Marvel movies, we've spent a healthy amount of time chasing Infinity Stones, right, in one way or another. Very specifically in Infinity War and Endgame. But, I mean, they've made appearances.
Yeah, the collection of movies from Iron Man 1 to Endgame was collected as the Infinity Saga.
Exactly. The Infinity Stones are very powerful MacGuffins, but we have now taken the power away from these MacGuffins, and so now we have to center on something else that is probably not going to be a physical object anymore.
That makes sense. Obviously with this and Doctor Strange and even the little bit we know about Spider-Man No Way Home, it's probably going to deal a lot with time and dimensional travel.
Spider-Man usually get up to time and dimensional travel?
Not a whole lot.
Okay.
But he does.
Okay.
It happens. He will occasionally get cosmic. And when he does, it's usually to hilarious effect, because he is
Spider-Man.
He is Spider-Man, and he is so far out of his comfort zone, and his defense mechanism is humor.
Right.
So, is constantly just quipping left and right, because that's the only way he knows how to deal with things this beyond his usual power level.
I can sympathize.
Yeah. I am much the same. Yeah. And after Loki has this revelation, realizes what a powerful agency the TVA is, then we get the Hunter coming back, and Loki is able to escape her once again, and now he returns to the Time Theater, and this is where we get the real crux of the episode. This is where Loki really becomes more the Loki that we know from the later movies, because he witnesses a lot of the stuff that he experienced in the Prime Universe.
Mm-hmm. And it's at this point that he confesses to Mobius that he does not enjoy causing pain, as right. Mobius had accused him of. Mm-hmm. But he does equate pain with power.
Yeah.
Therefore, you control people, you have power because you can cause them pain unless they do what you want. That's pure Machiavelli right there. It's better to be feared than loved.
And earlier in the episode, he had accused the TVA of, I know what all this is. It's an illusion. It's a cruel trick conjured by the weak to inspire fear. And then he brings those words back at this moment, but he's talking about himself.
Yep.
And of course, when he's looking at the TVA and accusing them of being villains, he uses the words that describe him. When he sees the worst in others, he's actually seeing the worst of himself.
Agreed. Nicely observed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now we're getting near the end of the episode, and now Mobius finally tells him something that those of us who knew the premise of the show already knew, which is that the variant they are chasing down, the one that is causing all of these issues, is another variant Loki.
Right.
And so now we have the full premise of the show, which is Loki chasing Loki, which is why the logo for Loki is constantly changing fonts.
That was a really interesting piece, again, design-wise, because at this beautiful black and white kind of burnt out film look, that looks very old or very cheap film. And of course, it's going through all of these different fonts right and left, including several runes from Old Norse runes. So, changing subjects. That is actually a little mind-blowing in that the puny god part where Hulk grabs Loki by the feet and wails him back and forth into the ground of Stark's glorious apartment.
Yeah. That
was like an hour ago, tops, for Loki. I mean, he's a god. He has a certain level of recovery that us mere mortals don't have, but still.
Yeah.
Yeesh. It's been a day for that guy.
If you think about the timeline from Loki's point of view, when he said he's had a very rough day, he was not kidding.
Not at all. Nope. Nope. Beaten up by a Hulk, spit out of the sky and into the desert.
Yeah.
Slow motion, walloped by a time cop.
Put on trial for a crime he doesn't even understand.
Yeah.
It's been an interesting day in the Laufey Sun household. But after Mobius tells Loki who they're chasing, then we cut to Oklahoma in 1858.
Mm-hmm.
And we see them hidden by a hood, so we don't know exactly who it is, but we have to assume that that is the variant Loki that is being chased. And the hunter team that shows up finds some technology there from the early third millennium, which would be Kang's time period. And while the 1850s are weird time period-wise, Oklahoma is interesting because in the comics, there was a period of time where Asgard was relocated to 30 or 40 feet above a town called Broxton, Oklahoma. It was when Straczynski was writing the comic, who's also
Babylon
the creator.
5.
Yes.
Yeah.
He wrote Thor for a while and had them interacting with just regular people from Broxton, Oklahoma. So I found it interesting that this Loki was specifically in Oklahoma. When it was relocated, it was in our modern times, so It was the early mid-2000s, not 1850s, but there's still that kind of connection there to the comics.
Well, and the question, does that become a plot point, or is that just an Easter egg?
It'll be interesting to see if the time periods that are chosen by this other Loki have been chosen for specific reasons, or if they're just random periods of time where a Nexus event is easy to create for some reason or another.
Mm-hmm.
But again, with the technology related to that third millennium, we have that Kang reference. And so they're really tying in all of the upcoming sequels into this show.
Well, it's good setup. I mean, it's not dumb marketing-wise.
Yeah. But it seems like even more than WandaVision did, they're actively tying this show in and making it important to what is coming up in the future of the Marvel Universe. that seems like a pretty good place to stop. We discussed things for a little longer, but mostly just praising the show in general. If you want to hear that and the other discussion that didn't make it into the final edit, Patreons have access to the full unedited audio. It's just $1 per month, and in this case, that's nearly an hour of material, so check it out at patreon.com/welcome to Geektown. In the meantime, don't forget to send in any questions you have that you would like answered in a future episode, or just comments on the show in general. Send any missives via email to welcometogeektown, all spelled out, at gmail.com. Or you can go to the website, welcome to, the number 2 in this case, geektown.com, and click the Submit a Question link if you'd prefer to remain anonymous. Other contact options include facebook.com/welcome to Geektown or Twitter at Geektown Podcast. You can help the show grow by subscribing and giving a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts to join the Geektown City Council, which helps other people find the show so we can all tell them,
Welcome to Geektown, population, us.
Welcome to Geektown is written, narrated, edited, and produced by me, Kurt Onstead. Theme music is by Aaron Levitz, logo art by Archie Santana. All other sound clips are the copyrighted material, their respective owners, and no infringement is intended, falling into fair use.